A few months ago, I made a video called My Favorite Tank, where I outlined one interesting aspect of an unusual champion, Malphite. Tanks in League of Legends are some of the easiest champions to play and might be the least skill-expressive archetype out there. After all, almost all of their abilities are either point-and-click abilities, or they're skill shots that are so easy to land you can hardly classify them as skill shots. But Malphite is interesting with how his ultimate interacts in teamfights in the late game. If you play Malphite, you'll come across many situations where you can maybe get a guaranteed kill with your ultimate if you engage on this mispositioned carry, but sometimes that's the wrong play. Sometimes you need to wait a bit and get an even better ultimate off to win a team fight, which is crazy to me, the thought that solo killing an important carry with your combo could be a bad play. I mean, that's an insanely weird dynamic, so I made a video on it. But I'll be honest, that video was more of a farewell to Malphite than anything else, since even if I liked him, he was a really bad champion. There are some champions out there right now, like maybe Nunu or Nautilus, that are unplayable, but other than that, Malphite might be one of the worst champions in the game. His old kit, all the bad matchups he had, how easy he was to counterpick, there were so many things that caused him to be a poor champion that my video was really just meant to be one last hurrah before his impending rework. But then, patch 7.22 happened, the new runes came out, and Malphite went from being one of the worst champions in the game to arguably the best tank out there. Right now, you could maybe say that Malphite is a little bit better of a blind pick, and maybe Cho'Gath is a little easier as well, but other than that, Malphite might be the best top lane tank in the game. I don't think we've ever seen a complete 180 like this before, where a champion goes from being one of the worst picks out there to one of the best, and that's the subject of today's video. Just how the hell did this happen? So to understand what makes Malphite so good now, you first have to understand what made him so bad before. He does have some good elements in his kit that he's always had, like his ultimate, which is great for team fighting, and he's a tank that can scale for damage by building tank stats. Similarly to how Cho'Gath's ultimate deals more damage the more health he stacks, Malphite gets to deal more damage the more armor he builds. But that's really it. I mean, those are the only good things about his kit, and unfortunately, all the other weaknesses that Malphite has just made it so he wasn't ever worth picking. There's a million different flaws that contributed to Malphite being bad, but almost all of them fell into one of two categories. Firstly, his kit was one of the most ancient, old, and outdated kits in the game, and secondly, as a result of that, every other top laner in the game could beat him. So you know how patches in League of Legends are released based on the season or the year that they come out? Like, we're on patch 7.23 right now because we're in the 7th year of League of Legends, or season 7. Well, to give you some perspective on how old Malphite is, he was released on patch 0.9.22.16. That's before season 1, way back in what I think was technically still League's beta. And you know what's amazing? None of Malphite's abilities have ever been changed. That's actually a little bit of a lie. When he first came out, his abilities were all on different keys. His Ground Slam was on his Q, Seismic Shard his W, and Brutal Spikes was his E. And since his release, that ability, Brutal Spikes, which is now his W, was kind of changed once, where it now deals AoE damage and it has a new animation for it. But that's pretty much it. It's honestly amazing that such an old champion has never seen a major rework or even a visual update. I mean, Malphite is just ancient, and his gameplay sadly showed that in a very negative light for a while. He has all these problems with his kit that are endemic of older champions in League, like he's super heavily reliant on his abilities, but he can't spam them due to having very high mana costs. Old tanks in League were designed in a much different way from the current tanks we have, where they all had really strong abilities, but Riot would balance that out by giving those abilities super high mana costs, so you couldn't really just spam these abilities non-stop willy-nilly. You either had to just save them and use them in important team fights or maybe a skirmish here or there, or you had to go and get blue buff. Think of champions like Jungle Amumu or even old pre-rework Sion. Malphite has really high mana costs on his abilities compared to some of the other tanks out there. They have been reined in a little bit over the years, but one problem he still has is he has one of the smallest mana pools in the game, making those high mana costs hurt even more. He's stuck as this champion where all of his power is in his abilities, but he can't ever spam those abilities without running out of mana, where other champions can take advantage of this and outduel him, bully him super hard in the early laning phase, since he can't fight back, where if he does, he runs out of mana and gets bullied even harder. On top of that, his kit also has all these weird issues that make it difficult to play him well top lane now. Like, he's a champion who has no sustain, where in the current meta, almost every single champion and every other tank top lane has some form of sustain nowadays. He gets kited surprisingly easily as well, which makes using his E very difficult. His Q move speed buff might have been enough to gap close in the past, but now, with everyone having so much mobility and players also just being so much better at attack click moving, it's a lot more difficult than it ever was before to get a good E off. And you also just see weird things in his kit here and there that show his age, like he doesn't have any skill shots. When you have an ability like Malphite's Q that's a point and click ability, that means Riot can't ever make it too good. If it doesn't take skill to land and there's no way to dodge it, Riot can't ever make it this amazing ability that deals a ton of base damage before you even buy any AP. But all of these problems led to a much bigger issue for Malphite. Every single champion in the game can beat him top lane if played correctly. There isn't a single matchup where Malphite is guaranteed to win, but there are plenty of matchups where he is guaranteed to lose. Firstly, there are the obvious counter picks like mage top laners who he can't just stack armor against, stuff like Lissandra, Swain, or the big one, Rumble, who are insane counter picks that are almost impossible to deal with. But even if you ignore them, there are still so many other tough matchups. Against other tanks, Malphite actually has the same issue he has against other mages. He can't build armor. Almost all tanks top lane deal magic damage, not physical. Him not really being able to build efficiently and having to go for weird MR items early on makes it so he has to worry about working that stuff into his build and delaying his natural scaling, allowing his opponents to outscale him as tanks. Against Juggernauts, Malphite can get shredded pretty easily. Juggernauts are kind of built to shred and counter tanks anyway, which makes it really hard for him to CS in these lanes, and again, he just kind of gets outscaled. But lastly, who do we have left? Fighters and Bruisers, who are supposed to be the champions that Malphite counters, but even these champions have a window of opportunity where early on in the game, Malphite is crazy weak. Again, he can't really spam his abilities to harass them early on in laning phase because of their high cost and his low mana pool, and so they can actually bully Malphite out of lane early on and either get a kill on him or get a solid CS lead that they can use to snowball throughout the rest of the game. I mean, Malphite really had nothing going for him, and he was for sure on the chopping block for getting reworked, which is what makes it so insane that he is now one of the best tanks in the game. What makes him so good as of patch 7.22 is the rune changes, which I'm sure you could have guessed, but let's be specific about just what the runes do to make Malphite so much better, since pretty much every rune he takes either fixes a problem his kit previously had, or it makes the few things he did well so much better. These are the two main rune pages players are running on Malphite at the moment, either going for Resolve in the primary tree and Sorcery in the secondary, or flipping that and going for Sorcery in the primary and Resolve in the secondary, where you pretty much go for the same runes no matter what you do. This decision is mostly about whether you want Grasp of the Undying or the Meteor for your Keystone. I personally prefer the Meteor page, so let's go through that and talk about each one of these runes and show you just what they do for Malphite. Firstly, the Meteor Keystone is almost guaranteed to land on your opponent every single time if you are pairing this with your Q. Your Q will slow your opponent enough so that they cannot dodge the Meteor unless they use a dash to get out of it, or they have some sort of movement speed boost from something like a Phage proc they've used. Players won't really want to dodge this with any abilities or anything though, since it's on such a short cooldown and the damage seems negligible at first, but this will give you so much power to Malphite's poke over time. You will routinely deal 1500 damage or more with this alone over the course of an entire game. I mean, even in this game where I went 3, 8, and 9 and ended up losing, I still dealt nearly 3000 damage with my Keystone. This helps out so much with the weak laning that Malphite has had forever. I mean, he can finally fight back and duel either against the old counterpicks that could harass him for days before, or the champions he's actually supposed to do well against. He can finally punish them early on and prevent them from getting that early lead to scale with. Next up, you have some of the smaller runes, beginning with the ultimate hat. This is the rune that will reduce the cooldown of your ultimate with a base base CDR and then stacking the CDR even higher each time you use the ultimate, totaling as much as 15%. This is phenomenal on Malphite, obviously. His ultimate is the best thing about him, and one of his larger weaknesses that I hadn't mentioned before is just how long its cooldown is. The fact that this stacks with your normal cooldown reduction too is insane. I mean, you'll have like a 45-second or 55-second cooldown on your ultimate in the late game when you have everything stacked and are at level 16. This is an ability that was meant to be used sparingly because of how powerful it is, and now you will have it up for every team fight, every duel, and you can even use it freely as an escape again. On top of this though, stacking normal CDR as well is easier than ever since you are going to be going for Transcendence for your next rune, which of course gives you 10% CDR at level 10, and any CDR that you go over the CDR cap with will get translated into adaptive damage. This is pretty important on Malphite. Malphite is a champion who synergizes very well with CDR items, whether they be tank items like Frozen Heart, AP items like Zhonya's, or hybrid items like Iceborne Gauntlet. One issue that Malphite has had before, though, is that he doesn't want to go over the CDR cap and waste the inefficiency in his build, so he's just sort of had to pick and choose which good items he's wanted in the past, never really being able to get them all. But now you can get all of them, and they are going to help you even more. Finally, we have Scorch, which is another rune that causes your next ability to deal a little bit of extra burn damage over time. Again, this synergizes incredibly well with his Q Meteor combo and just lets you actually survive a laning phase, which is incredible. In the Resolve tree, you have a bunch of options that are all great again, but if you're going to go for Resolve as your secondary, you should probably pick up a Resistance rune, either the Flat Armor one or Conditioning, which works out well with Malphite being such a late game scaling champion, in addition to Second Wind or maybe Overgrowth. Again, you can see these are all helping Malphite out with his tankiness, his sustain, and keeping him alive, getting him through the tough parts of his game that he struggled with previously, helping him reach his end game fantasy. So what do you get with Malphite with all of these changes when we're all said and done? You have your rune page set up and you go into a game, you will get the greatest show on turf. You're going to end games not only being the top damage dealer on your team, but you're also going to be tanking a crazy amount of damage and having the least deaths on your team. I mean, depending on how many of your teammates are feeders, you might lead your team in damage dealt and damage taken and have the least deaths of anybody. Other tanks cannot do this, by the way. Maokai is a great tank and maybe the best tank in the game right now outside Malphite, but he relies on his teammates to do all the damage for him. He's a CC machine that's never going to die, but he's just setting up his carries to hopefully carry the game for him and not really be able to do too much else himself. But on Malphite, you get to never die, but also be the carry. Malphite might actually end up going from a champion that was about to be reworked because he was so garbage to suddenly needing a rework because he's too broken. I mean, say what you will about his kit being boring, about Rumble maybe still counterpicking him, or you could even say he's not even that good and is still beatable. I mean, some of these win rate graphs, I don't even know what they're saying, but maybe he's not the best tank in the game. But he is, excuse me, a damn fine tank top laner, and he's someone that's really exciting to see come back into popularity again. We may be headed into another tank meta top lane, but at least we have some fresh blood in the lane. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed watching today's video. Thank you very much to my patrons supporting me on Patreon. I would not be able to make videos like this without your support. I appreciate all of you very, very much. I will be back with another video soon, but until then, thank you very much for watching. Good luck in solo queue, and have a wonderful day.